Typically, I like to talk about topics or games I've been passionate about for the last 20-some years of my life on this planet, and typically I talk in an annoyingly pedantic and dragged out intro, but that's not the case this time. Instead, I simply got a good deal on a game, I decided to try it, and I liked it, and I wanted to talk about a less mainstream game, so instead of some well thought out topic that had accumulated thoughts over these 20 years of my life, instead this is just gonna be me talking about the game.
Roll the video!
AAA, for those unfamiliar with gaming terminology, this refers to AAA is an informal classification used to classify video games produced or distributed by a mid-sized or major publisher, which typically have higher development and marketing budgets than other tiers of games. Basically, it refers to your big-name developers. However, for every Super Mario game, Halos, and Final Fantasies, are hundreds of little teams making projects that will roll out under the radar. However, some will grow a fanbase of their own. I mean, I think it's pretty telling that the most sold game of all time was made by one guy, and for a while was kept up by a small team of developers. And there are many other popular games with similar stories attached to them. And with that, cue a seamless transition, please. Developed by Mint Rocket and Nexon, Dave the Diver is one of the most modern versions of this, at least to me. And I won't lie, this was kind of a case of judging a book by a cover. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I expected it to be a bad game, but more so the name was just kind of funny, making me think it was some short but sweet game, with very little underneath the surface to keep me coming back for more. Either way, enough of this yip yap, I'm here to talk about the game, and gosh darn it, I'm finna do that. Yeah, also, one last note, in case you're curious just how last second this video concept was, all the footage I have is from near the end of the game, so spoilers, I guess. Dave the Diver combines both action-adventure and management gameplay styles, making it a bit of an amalgamation of games, and believe it or not, there's even a story, which surprised me, as I wasn't expecting any big lore. At most, I was expecting something akin to Stardew Valley, but there actually is a story here. However, I'm not going to touch too much on it, but I'll just say I appreciate it being there. It just adds another layer and helps make the progression and upgrades feel more rewarding. To encompass the main gameplay loop, I'll break it down so we're both on the same page here. You play around this clock up here, and you have 3 major time slots to use, that being morning, evening, and night, though unlike other time management games, instead of being essentially a glorified timer, certain actions consume the time slot, i.e. going diving. Basically, you dive all morning, evening, and you can even use some of that nighttime slot to dive as well. Yeah, when you start to see what you use your time on, you can kind of see why they name it the way it is. So the main gameplay, diving. You can swim in any direction, and your main mechanics consist of a knife for collecting certain collectibles.
Help me.
And a harpoon for catching fish.
Miss.
And later on, you can also get some underwater guns to protect yourself or to help in hunting tougher fish as well. So you may be thinking, well, what, you can just fish as long as you want? Well, no. To balance this, there are 2 things that limit your time diving. The first one being oxygen. Adoy. Oxygen will slowly deplete over time, and is used up more by dashing, and upon running out, you are forced to the surface, only being able to return with one of the items you had on you. Oh yeah, and oxygen is also your HP, so getting hit depletes oxygen as well. And the second limit is your storage. You see, you can only hold a certain amount of items, which all have these different weight amounts, and certain things weigh more than others. And upon hitting a certain threshold, you begin to move slower. And a little bit more weight added to that means you can no longer carry anything else. So you can't simply grind fish and items indefinitely. And lastly, you can only dive so deep before oxygen depletes incredibly fast, but we'll come back to that. So you gather these fish, but to what end? Well, once your diving is done, you'll return to Bancho Sushi, where the fish you caught get sent. And this is where the other major part of the game comes in. You are essentially the manager and have to choose what's on the menu, what amount of it, serve food, pour drinks, wash dishes, refill the wasabi, and eventually you can invest in workers, which does cost money, but then opens up new opportunities. For example, your popularity increases and in turn, more customers will begin to appear. And unfortunately, you are just one guy, and people are only so patient. So, of course, having more hands serving helps, and more chefs to expedite everything helps a lot. But that's not all there is to it. You actually can also send your workers to collect certain ingredients instead of relying on just these underwater pots. You can also invest more funds into training your staff, and eventually they can even earn skills such as guaranteed tips, a permanent boost to certain skills, and even allow them to serve certain drinks or allow them to complete other tasks that only you yourself would normally be able to complete. And at the end of the day, you'll see your overall stats and gather some artisan's flames that you can spend to learn some new recipes. And, well, that's pretty much the main gist. You can then repeat, you dive fish, run sushi, and stuff. But of course, that's not all there is to it. Just like in real life, what's your motivation to be doing this? Money! So, what do we do with the money on the context of this game? Well, I already mentioned your workers, but you can also reinvest into your diving as well, with upgrades to your harpoon for easier catching, your knife for more versatility with what you can collect, your guns for more damage, or allow them to have different effects. And arguably the two best upgrades, inventory space and your depth limit, allowing for new fish, materials, mechanics, and honestly, so much more. Oh yeah, and while on the topic of new things opening up from being able to explore new horizons,
Oh, brother!
something that genuinely surprised me was the story. Not that it was groundbreaking, nor it being laughably bad, but rather than there being much in the way of the story in the first place. As I mentioned earlier, I kind of just assumed, like most sim-like games, there simply wouldn't be one, or that there'd be simply just some intro cutscene to set the stage, but there actually is a full-blown story here. As stated, I'm not really gonna say much about the story, 1, for time, 2, for spoilers. I'll just say it's alright. Nothing that shattered all previous assumptions I had of storytelling, but it's nice there's something to incentivize playing the game. But of course, what would any story be without a good cast of characters, or at the very least, memorable characters? And boy howdy, we got them. And while none of them have that deep of lore or background, as mentioned earlier, they do help the game feel memorable. Like thus Ash Ketchum looking boy. And while I would have loved to say I have some interesting bit or joke about me secretly being this guy who's named Dr. Bacon because, you know, but I don't have anything clever to say, so I'll just say in my own headcanon that this is me, and this is a ode to me from the developers. I mean, the way he gets all excited about talking about ancient civilizations is basically me talking about why one furry animal in Animal Crossing is better than the other. Anyway, so yeah, the characters are nice, the gameplay's fun, but is that really all you did? No, you foolish individual. You can also participate in helping geological studies by collecting certain fish and fauna, catch all of the fish for Ash Ketchup, and then put them in this Pokédex looking thing, participate in side quests, take pictures of ancient civilizations for Dr. Bacon, help collect new guns that you then in turn can build and customize, have different effects, take pictures of rare fish for this guy to put in a magazine, including one weekly fish that is genetically deformed in some way, meaning you have to have some unique way of catching them. Oh yeah, and all the while this stuff is going on. Generally around once a week, there'll be a party of some kind where a bunch of tourists will flock into the area and want some type of fish that are generally involved in it, and if you catch a lot, you can generally make a lot of money. Or how about rivals or VIP clients who will come to the sushi bar and you have to find specific ingredients in order to impress them, and then participate in the cooking as well. Oh, and then eventually you'll be able to start farming both fish and crops in order to make better and better dishes that are worth more and more money. And then there's more depth to all that as well, and keep in mind, I'm still ignoring the story and a bunch of other stuff. And that's not even scratching the literal surface of stuff I haven't spoiled, including the fact that this game is still getting free DLC tie-ins with other games, including the most recent version of this by the making of this episode, a Godzilla crossover. You can also play this rhythm game, or this Tamagotchi-like pet trying to collect all of those as well, and there's still more that I didn't even mention here. This game has a lot, to say the very least. In fact, almost too much of a lot, if that makes sense. A problem a lot of games face, especially from newer developers, is having too many things and none of them being well developed enough. The result is just having a cluster of unfinished and unfun mechanics that aren't enjoyable at all. And Dave the Diver, on the other hand, doesn't really suffer from this problem too much. Sure, there are a few small things that can be annoying or a little disappointing, and there isn't as much depth to some parts of them as I think there could be, but considering this was still made by a smaller team and it's getting updates, I'm confident that a lot of the things that I'm mentioning here can change. And if you couldn't tell by me talking about this game, I enjoy it a lot. And generally when I talk about games, I like for it to be mostly positive, because that's the reason I play games, is because I enjoy them. But I do think it is worth mentioning, as always, the complaints I do have with this game. And the first being that while the core concept is that the area we dive into changes every time you go in, and it's supposed to be this weird thing to think about and should affect the gameplay, but this ends up not really being true. There's only a few different forms that the terrain and such can take, and the fish spawns can vary slightly, but if you play for long enough, you'll kind of just know where everything can appear, and you'll know where to start checking. I'm not saying it need to be some procedurally generated stuff, as that can have its own consequences and can be quite difficult, but I think either a bit more variety or cutting out that the blue hole changing everyday storyline and just change it to that for some reason you dive in different places explanation. I just feel like that would fit better for how the gameplay actually is in reality. And honestly, when it comes to the diving, that's pretty much my only real gripe, as I feel like everything else worked out fairly well. The only other thing I could complain about is that some of the fish's hitboxes are kind of dumb and makes it feel kind of cheap when you get hit by something like a tail that grazed your foot and ends up taking 30% of your oxygen. But I do actually have one other bigger complaint about the game, which it may sound weird considering I just said there's a lot of content here, but it has to do with a lack of things to do, specifically with your daytime hours. As I mentioned, there are a lot of things to accomplish, but you could actually get through a lot of them fairly quickly should you spend the time to do so. For example, at this time of writing, I have spent over around 60 hours playing the game, and for context, I've been playing this on the PlayStation 5 despite me being a Nintendo fan. Yeah, I know, get your audible gasps out now. And I even got the Platinum Trophy for this game, mostly because, one, it wasn't that hard to do so, and because I just genuinely enjoyed it. Well, by the end of my playthrough, around the last 5 hours or so for context-ish, I had just very little reason to dive. Don't get me wrong, of course, you still have to worry about your stock and things like that, but once you clear a lot of the story missions, catch all the fish and things like that, and you really begin buying up your different types of farms and expanding them, it just kind of becomes redundant to go fishing, and it takes just so much time in real life, so you end up just using the time skip button, which it's nice it's there to skip to nighttime so you can actually progress with the game, and I'm not saying that the farm is a bad mechanic or that the diving is undercooked. I think both these things are fine by themselves. What I do think should happen is a rebalancing of these mechanics. Whether it be you get more stock from actually fishing, or it's a rare chance to actually get the fish eggs, or for them to breed, or you just get less meat from them. Something like that. And or something else to use your daytime hours on. Of course, one of the biggest draws I had to these type of simulator games comes from my passion and love for games like Harvest Moon, which got me into the genre growing up. And for those of you uninformed, a big part of Harvest Moon is, of course, trying to make money on your farm and whatnot, but another big half is trying to befriend your townsfolk. Now, I'm not saying that Dave the Diver needs to become an Animal Crossing clone where you start walking around making friends with everybody, but implementing something else to use these daytime hours on would be nice. And I know it's crazy to say given just how much content there already is and how big of a scene I made about it, but I just feel like a rebalancing into the daytime hours specifically would be nice. For example, eventually you end up opening a branch for Bancho Sushi, which opens independently at night as well. Perhaps you could actually open the branch during the day as well, and work there for both the morning and noontime slots, allowing you to in turn not only make more money, but then also use daytime hours if you do not need to fish. This will also actually help fix the congestion issue of product. As I had mentioned, you at some point end up not really needing to fish unless there's some big event, and usually when it caught up on, or you're trying to get some fish eggs to eventually have them breed. Well, having 2 time slots where you're using them even more of your product would mean that you're going to run out much quicker. This would then, in turn, mean that you'd be encouraged to help fish to keep up with that demand. Again, this is just me spouting off nonsense. I have no real knowledge about creating games, but I do think that something like that would be beneficial for this game in the long run. Alright, that's been a lot of babbling about this game, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I just want the conclusion of this video to be, if this sounds like a game you enjoy, I do encourage you to check it out. Its price isn't terrible, it was a fun, enjoyable experience, especially if you enjoy games like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing or Harvest Moon, which I know some of you at least like Animal Crossing, and want to branch out to try some new things. I think Dave the Diver is a good experience, and one that the team did a really good job on. I mean, that's why I'm talking about it here. And as I mentioned, they're continuously pouring out downloadable content as of now, so that's always really nice. but again, at the end of the day, I do encourage any of you who found it interesting me talking about this game to either go try it for yourself or watch someone play it and then try it for yourselves, if you get the chance. Dave the Diver is a really enjoyable experience overall, and the team did a really good job with it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some Legos to go play with. But before I do that, as always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. Alright, it's Lego time! Hey, you watched my dumb video about a random game. Thank you! Thank you all for your patience while I've been working on stuff. Summer has been very busy. And while I have you here, if you liked this video, you know there's a button for that. And you can also support me in making more of this stuff by subscribing just so you can stick around and make fun of me, because that's always fun. Either way, hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later.